Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Impactful Conversations podcast with myself, Dr. Glenn Wallis, and my very good friend and co-host, Nejmi Alexander. Hello, Nejmi, how are you, mate?
I'm very well, thanks, Glenn. Spring has sprung. I'm feeling optimistic and looking very forward to the conversation that we're going to have today.
Yeah, me too. Me too. We're absolutely delighted to have as a guest today, leadership expert, a leadership author, and somebody who's deeply interested in AI and how leaders wrestle with the future that seems to be unfolding before our very eyes, almost minute by minute. Campbell MacPherson. Campbell, what an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. It should be a great conversation about all things leadership and all things artificial intelligence. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, brilliant, brilliant. Well, let's kick off with a couple of things, if we might. Could you give the audience a very sort of brief overview of how you've kind of ended up in the leadership space and particularly in relation to AI? And then I think you've got a brilliant um, sort of scaffolding or sort of framework
It's a good
that
way to
leaders
put it.
need to think about it. And it would be good, I think, before we sort of get into conversation for people to understand that. So could you kick us off with those couple of things?
Sure. No, so I'm a leadership and change expert, if you like, or a specialist. I work with organizations all over the world to help them to build leadership teams that excel and also to help them leaders to build extraordinary leaders of change, starting with themselves. So my shtick has always been about leading change. Why 88% of change fails is due to leadership. So my first book was The Change Catalyst, which was the 2018 Business Book of the Year, and that was all about leading change. Then the next books have been variations on that themes, and the current one is called Leading with Influence, which is the same name as the program, and the preface to that is all about leading in an AI world because AI is simply the biggest change that organizations and governments have to cope with, have to embrace, have to learn how to thrive in, and that will inevitably come down to change leadership. So that's how it all comes together in my book.
And you've got sort of three scenarios that you
Mm.
have outlined, which when I heard you speak, I thought, yeah, sort of intuitively absolutely got, and I thought it was a lovely way of framing that. Can you give us again a brief overview, and then as part as the as the conversation unfolds, we can explore that some more.
We'll unpack each of them. Yeah, I
Yeah,
see three very broad scenarios that are really hard to disagree with. They're not discrete scenarios. I think what is happening is a combination of all three, with some emphasis on number two. So the first scenario is, let's just assume, and in any scenario planning, it's assuming it's picturing some futures that may occur and are likely to occur, and then working out what the likelihood is. Well, scenario one is what I call false dawn, where AI fails to live up to its hype, and we see elements of that all over the place. AI is expensive. AI can disappoint, but that depends on how we actually use AI. To be perfectly honest, but scenario one is that AI just doesn't quite get off the ground. Scenario two is augmented intelligence, which is AI, and it really is at the moment, and it should be at the moment, is our invaluable assistant. So it's helping us to do things quicker, to deliver improved outcomes, and to be more productive and effective. So do things quicker, do things better, and to be better at what we do. And it is absolutely an invaluable tool. And I think that's where we are at the moment, but not exclusively. Now, option three is the Skylink Armageddon scenario, which is what I call human displacement, and that's where a lot of the attention or headlines have been. And there are elements of that that could possibly come true as we see. We're already seeing the big four halve the number of entry level jobs that they're hiring. Same thing with the magic circle of the law industry. So they're the three scenarios: false dawn, augmented intelligence, and human displacement. And what leaders need to do, in my opinion, is to keep an eye on how AI is working out and work out what they can do to identify and thrive in each of those three scenarios, but also to do some probability analysis. I believe augmented intelligence is already here, and that is going to be the bulk of the future. But there will be a little bit of false dawn, and there'll be a little bit of human displacement, and it'll be different for different industries and different for different departments within organizations.
Yeah. I'm picturing like a bell curve. We're mostly in scenario two. There's
Exactly.
little sprinklings on either side. I agree, Campbell. I feel like I see a lot of scenario two happening. I certainly it's true in my world, and sometimes with clients too. Maybe with some sprinklings of scenario three, but I feel like it's still very early doors in that respect. There's some
Yes.
signs that it could go in that direction in some ways. Um, in your work with leaders and in your experience, where do you feel that people tend to be getting it wrong when they're thinking about, where we are or what scenarios could potentially play out in their department, in their leadership, or in their teams?
Good question, Nejmi. I think where people are getting it wrong is that they either do nothing or assume scenario three. And that's where that's what I think is where they're missing the boat. So if you assume scenario two and keeping an eye out for it won't be perfect and more jobs might be replaced than we're currently planning. But if you assume scenario two, then the world opens up for you to be, what can I do? How can I use AI to improve my job to be more efficient? How can I use it to produce better outcomes than I'm doing at the moment? And how can I use it to engage my team in getting enthusiastic about how do we use these tools to improve the way that we work and to be more innovative? If you AI is an idiot savant at the moment, the large language models. It depends on how you prompt it. It's garbage in, garbage out times 10. It depends on how you prompt it is what you're getting out. So helping people to unleash their curiosity and remove the fears, look at the opportunities of HI and experiment with it is some of the key things that I recommend leaders try and do. So I love the bell curve idea, but it'll be a different bell curve for finance than it will for HR, that will for marketing, it will for coding. And so it's about being flexible and it's about, well, I've got 9 essential leadership traits that I could run through from the video that you saw, Glenn. Um,
Mm.
and this is what I think leaders should be following.
So if I've understood that correctly, then Campbell, there's a kind of pragmatism, which is if you, and it's not a hedge, it's not an uncertain hedge. It's based on what we know. If you assumed we're in the sort of middle ground, actually you're not going to get left behind so quickly than if you'd situated yourself in the false dawn mentality, and you're maybe not going to overinvest by assuming, or indeed maybe just throw your hands up and go, well, it's all going to be robot led, and what place do I have in the world? There's a kind of pragmatism as well to sitting in that middle space,
There
right?
is.
Which is you're involved rather than being standing apart from. Is that
I
fair?
think that's so important. I think you've hit it on the button there. It's not a hedge. It's actually embracing scenario two with an eye on the sprinkling, as you call it, Nesri, of scenario one and three. So, but embracing it, and in fact, that's the first leadership trait that I recommend people adopt, which is embrace the change, lead the change. AI is here. There's some real opportunities to it for me, for my people, for my organization. So let's embrace it. Let's not be technophobe. Let's not stand back and see where it goes. Let's get in and get mucky on it. Let's really embrace this change. No leadership of no leader of change ever succeeded by not embracing the change, for goodness sake. So, let's embrace this enormous change, not leave it up to others. I say something to leaders that they like the first part of the sentence and don't like the second part of the statement. And the first part is I say, please do not worry, you will not be replaced by AI. And you can see their shoulders drop. And then I say, you'll be replaced by someone using AI. And then their shoulders come back up again. And so let's embrace this change. And that's the number one essential trait. Do you want me to run through the 9 just to set the scene very quickly?
Yeah, I think that'd be
Okay.
helpful.
So number one is embrace the change and lead the change. Number two is understand the potential consequences of AI, which is the same with any change. That's number two. Number three is strengthen your strategic core. This is one is a little bit off the wall, but to be flexible, you have to know what your purpose is, what your ethos is, what your magic is, and the value that you add as a person, as a team, as a department, as an organization. And that gives you the strategic core to be flexible, just like in yoga, really. Then number four is soothe the fears about AI, because everyone has fears about AI, real or imagined. Number five, unleash your curiosity. Number six, champion what if thinking. So let's be innovative. Where could this go? And you can see the enthusiastic, proactive language, and you can see my hands moving around as well. Encourage healthy skepticism is number seven, because AI delivers what it thinks is the right result, but it doesn't have your experience. So be skeptical, be thankful and skeptical about what it gives you back, and then own it. Eight is hone your emotional intelligence. You cannot out robot a robot. And number nine is adopt stewardship. In other words, leave you, leave your business, leave your department, leave your people in a better state than when you found it. And with those nine, can govern any change really, but particularly relevant for a world of AI.
It feels, just in when you were describing those, Campbell, it feels like, discovering where your edge is in terms of, curiosity and leading into that change, strengthening that core really feels like that sits at the core of how to drive, how to lead in a AI world. And it feels like there are a host of great leadership traits there that would be useful in any change, and in leading through the most significant, I think, generational change that everybody is experiencing and will continue to experience in this AI context. I'm really curious, when you think about those nine, which of those do you feel sits right at the top of importance, and which of those do you feel maybe can be like overrated, overstated, or
Yeah.
misunderstood by leaders in your experience?
That's good. What's most understood is the same with every change, and that is the bit about strengthening your strategic core. And I think most leaders overestimate how clear the strategic core is to themselves, to their leadership team, and to their people. And as soon as they start to ask their people, tell me, what is our purpose? What is your purpose? What is your department's purpose? What's the ethos? What do we want to be famous for? What are we really good at? These basic, I call it the magic, but if you ask those questions, you'll soon find out that it's not that clear to the organization. The answers to those aren't that clear. And in fact, if you ask yourself, it's not exactly that clear in your head as well. So I think that's in any change, that's the bit that a lot of leaders paper over because they think it's clear, and yet it's not. But with AI, it's the curiosity, helping leaders to be confident enough to be curious about AI and see where it could go and see the benefits it could deliver. Let's explore. Let's find out, what could we do in half the time? What could we do that that AI could help us to deliver better results? How do we both improve the quality and do it in half the time? And that will free us up to then explore the innovation. But so it's the strategic core is the one that is undervalued, if you like, and curiosity is the key thing that I think could propel leaders into being on the front foot in leading their organizations in this world.
Yeah, I agree with you, particularly on the curiosity one. But it leaves me with a question which has come up on this podcast before, particularly when we've talked about big transformation efforts inside organizations and the role of the middle leader, middle manager type person,
Mm.
critical to change, and what a challenge they've got in relation to keeping the lights on in the business whilst sort of making the change actually happen and come to fruition. If I'm a leader listening to you suggest those areas and curiosity being key, how do I find the time? Where's the time to do those things. Where's the time to experiment with AI? Give me some advice on. I'm keen to do that. How do I balance these?
How do I get another 40 hours in the week? Yes, exactly.
These seemingly sort of competing demands.
Oh gosh, there's
Using
so many things in that statement. And that is the perennial challenge. Change fatigue. I don't have the time. Um, and to compound it, my answer will be learn how to delegate and empower, because that will end up freeing up time. But to start with, it will take even more time to delegate and empower effectively, because you won't get it right the first time. But you must create the time. So it's delegation, empowerment, prioritization. They're easy to roll off the tongue. But I've been in industry in leading roles, and the time is your most critical element. But you've got to learn how to prioritize, how to say no, how to delegate effectively, how to free up the time so you can think, so that you can spend time leading rather than doing. And that is the challenge. That is the perennial challenge. I love what you've said about the middle management. One of the CEOs I worked for back in Australia 30 years ago he used to call it his permafrost middle management layer. And I thought, that's brilliant. And yet really ignorant and arrogant at the same time, because they're only frozen because of you.
Yes. Exactly. The irony is not lost on us, believing me. If I might just quickly share a genuine case study that might be helpful for leaders who are listening, and it's in response to your very sound advice, which is, make time, but it might take more time initially. I would include delegating to AI. And so, I've at Exigence, we have a chief marketing officer that is a GPT. We're not a very large organization. So actually we built a GPT that works for us, and it does that. Now, it saved me, I can't tell you how many hours of work in an area that I don't know anything about, by the way. And so I am being skeptical about the response and not trying to get sucked in, but by it's better than I could do, therefore it's right. But it saved me so much time and money, frankly, to have help from AI. It took me tens of hours to get to a point where I was confident enough and could build a GPT. But that was paying itself back time after time after time in sort of factors. So I agree with your point, and some of that delegation could be to AI, but it needs a bit of investment up front. I don't know if that's
It
helpful
does.
for leaders who might be listening.
There were a couple of ideas that came to mind, Campbell, when you were describing those two areas. First, around sort of strategic clarity, and then the other area about curiosity and encouraging experimentation. With a previous client, fairly recently, we had this similar challenge, where the exec leadership team felt that clarity was strong, like it was very clear what the purpose was, and direction. Then we asked them a series of strategic questions. What is the purpose of this,
Yeah.
the team or function or whatever it might be? How are we successful? What makes us different? And then asked the next level down the same questions, and unsurprisingly, huge disparity in the answers that came up. And it was a really illuminating experience for that community to actually see, like, compare and contrast and actually have that conversation, because there was a lot of assumed
Totally.
knowledge or
Very
clarity
common. Yeah.
that had landed. And actually, I think that is a useful tip for any leader who is listening to this and thinking that, oh, my team are clear on what I would need from them, or our priorities are, or anything like that. Actually, just facilitate that as an exercise.
I couldn't agree more. And actually, you could even go one step further, which I did with one client. We had the top 100 leaders in a big conference room in 10 tables of 10, and the CEO stood up and gave his version of the strategy. And then I stood up and said, now, what could possibly go wrong? And everyone sort of tittered slightly. And then I went, no, seriously, because as the CEO was going through the strategy, all you could think of, which was to double the size of the business, double the funds under management, triple the profits, And I said to everyone, all that's going through your heads are everything that could possibly go wrong. The challenges, the risks, do we have to move premises? Are we going to double the size of the organization? What about our IT? All of these issues. I said, these are the consequences of the strategy. Let's get them all out on the table. And we did for an hour, got them all out on the table. Then we prioritized them. And then we handed them out to one for each of the 10 tables. And they worked on how to mitigate the key consequences that they'd come up with. And it was the best day that I've spent, because suddenly we had 100 people on board with the strategy because they'd had their fears, their concerns aired, and they'd started to work on a solution to them, not leaving it up to someone else. So it was accountability, it was consequences, it was all the wonderful words. If I'd put them up on the wall, everyone would have ignored them, but they were living them. It's such a good idea to not just ask people, do you understand the strategy? But right, what are the consequences of this? And the great thing was that the exec team was listening and then acting on it together.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
It feels like that could just accelerate the success rate of that strategy actually landing, being adopted, and being
I don't think there's any other way to be successful. Like as I said, 88% of changes don't live up to what they set out. Why? Because leaders don't stop to ask what could possibly go wrong and engage their people in. So, what are the consequences of this decision? They sort of forget that every decision has a consequence, good and bad, and to expect both, and anticipate as many up front, which of course is tough coming back to AI, but it's all very, very possible. Why not get the finance department together and go, right, what can we do quicker? What can we do better? And what new things can we do with this AI? Oh, yes, actually, a really good story about someone who a company rolled out Copilot to 3,000 employees, but with no training, no understanding, no organization. And then 2 months later, asked their employees, did a survey of how many had used it more than once. And the answer was, out of 3,000, the answer was 12.
12.
Because you need the training, you need the context, you need the permission to go and try something new, and none of that was done. They just rolled out the licenses.
And there is that little bit of people just keeping their head down and hoping it all goes away, right? Which is like, here we go round again.
What if I do it wrong?
Yeah, exactly. Well, obviously, you're working with large organizations, and you're on the inside often, Campbell. What's your sense of how organizations themselves, from whatever number of organizations you've been in of late, where they are on the adoption curve of not just the adoption of AI, but their adoption of helping people use it more frequently, gain the skills, gain the mindset, to be able to really embrace it. Back to our point from earlier on, what's your, if you lifted the lid on
invariably, as you would expect, some clients are really ahead. Some clients are really ahead at a cerebral level and doing absolutely nothing on a pragmatic, practical level, and others are different. Departments are flying, and others are too scared to touch it. And sometimes the larger organizations, the communications, the compliance departments end up slowing everything down because they're too scared to make a mistake and get blamed for it. So one of my clients, the IT department, is flying. It's a multinational insurer, and they used to use, it was Copilot really. They used to use Copilot to check all of their code. Now they use it to write all of their code, and they use the experienced software engineers to check the code. And the same thing is happening with a big law firm client of mine in a different way. They're using a different, not Copilot, they're using a different legal AI to be able to do a lot of the analysis and sort of pre-lawyer work, if you like, the paralegal work. The problem with both of those things, of course, where's the experienced people coming from? Because if you don't need junior programmers or junior lawyers, where's the experience that would come from to test everything and to be skeptical and to refine the work? So some are doing it at a very, very high level and are still looking at where it could go, but not jumping down, being pragmatic. And others, it's by department that is embracing it. But what they need to do is to pull it all together and have a company-wide enthusiasm about experimenting with AI.
So that leads me to another question that popped into my head as you were speaking, which is, let's say irrespective of where my organization is as a leader, it might be that we're flying, in which case it's probably fine, but maybe I'm working in an organization that's either slow to adopt or is again sticking its head in the sand. How could I get ready as a leader? How might I get myself into a good place to really embrace, scenario two, or potentially even get ready for three if that's where we're heading? What sort of practical advice would you give to leaders on the ground now about being ready?
Well, I would attack this in two fronts. One is try and help the organization to adopt these leadership changes, to be curious, to champion what if thinking, to say, oh, how could we use this to do things quicker, do things better? Um, but definitely jump in on your own time, maybe not even with your own home computer setup, and learn about Claude. Uh, put in some of your uh, use it to help some of your work, but not using your work laptop if the business doesn't allow that. Help Claude to help you, help Copilot to help you, help ChatGPT. Experiment at home with how you could do things quicker and do things better with improved quality. It is about teaching yourself, and the only way to do it is to jump in and start by asking simple questions and getting something that you could have got by Google search, um, and then to start refining it and prompting it and learning how to use it properly. Because to start with, use it as a better search engine, which they are, and then work out how to refine and how to ask it to do outrageous things and see where its limitations are. And just by doing that, you will be starting to expand your mind into asking the what ifs, how could this help? Where could this go? It's up to you. Do not wait for your organization, because you need to be the person that knows how to use AI, and therefore you will thrive in the new world. All of your colleagues that put their head in the sand won't thrive.
I'm gonna make an admission here, because I think it might be useful if anybody is listening to this thinking, oh, but I don't get the opportunity as you just described there, Campbell, because my company doesn't want me to use, AI or anything like that. Is like a use case for how to use this in your practical life. Like actually, I built more recently. I've been building a chat GPT, a custom GPT, which is like my I call it at GPT because it's my personal trainer. And so I've like trained it. Thank you. I
Oh,
trained it to understand my goals and like to define certain sessions. I give it feedback after every session around like how much effort all of these things like led to, and how much stability I felt I had or whatever. And so now I've got really bespoke, you know, guidance coach to help me with something very personal. And then more recently, I've been able to use that to build like a Notion. I'm quite analytic. So I've got like a Notion dashboard, which is all more or less automated. I can just take a note of, what I'm doing live on my opinion, share that into my phone. And then that can, update and give me very pretty, visuals around how I'm tracking and so on and so forth. And so you don't need to wait. You don't need to wait for
no,
an
no.
opportunity to build this into like your processes. That is a live, in this context is, me doing exercise at the gym, but that is a live process with
Mm.
tooling that could readily apply into any other process that you're sort of tracking,
Yeah,
monitoring,
that's
or
a good one.
describing in your day to day.
One of the things that I don't hear a lot of, I think both of what you both said, I hope has given people confidence to go, actually, I should just embrace this and crack on and try, because you can't get it wrong as long as you're not using data that is sensitive, in the sort of more public versions of these things. But I do think just having a play, and it takes some of the fear away. The one thing I don't hear a lot of, and it's a kind of meta thing, I guess, is using ChatGPT to help you use ChatGPT more effectively, or whatever large language model you're using.
Mm.
I've tried as a coach to sort of experiment with what would Claude be like, for example, coaching me with a genuine leadership type coaching scenario. And I have to say, with some tweaks and some refinements around its technique, it did a blooming good job. And you're in it for an
Mm.
hour. You're in it for an hour. In fact, of course, it could almost go on limitlessly, which is not very helpful in one sense. But I think there's a it's how do you also use these AI models as tools for yourself to improve your leadership?
That's
Be-
cool.
But you don't hear about that
Yeah.
so much. That's not
No.
the angle that organizations who are struggling to find money to spend on leadership development, or even the sort of incentives to do that, are not turning it on the leaders as a tool for leadership development. I don't know if
Yeah,
you've seen much
that's
of that.
interesting. That's a really good idea. I mean, the best thing would be going to leadingwithinfluence.online and having a look at my latest program, obviously.
Obviously.
But the second best thing would be to ask AI. And I asked I got onto something called Skywork.ai and thought, oh, I wonder what this is like. And I asked it. It took me 15 minutes to detail a prompt to how do I to create a launch strategy, a launch plan for my leadership program, latest leadership program. And I went in great detail. It's got 9 modules. I even said I'm an Australian living in the UK, so there's 2 markets. And I went into great detail that I didn't even know, half of which was superfluous. And it chunked away for about another 15 minutes and came up with a 32-page brilliant structure and 90% brilliant content, with pricing, uh, marketing positioning, practical marketing guidelines. It was really, really interesting. USPs. It was brilliant. But it was 90% because when I delved into it, it was quoting myself as an expert to prove that this was a really good course. So it's like, hang on. That's laws like looking into 2 mirrors that are just talking to one another. So I laughed and then thought, but I've got the structure and I learnt a lot from that, but then I had to make it my own, and
Yeah.
that's how to use it.
I think that's the difference between being skeptical, which is your work, measured in a measured skeptical way
Hmm.
that you use, Tony, which I think is really important, versus cynical. And I think
Oh, I
it's
like that.
easy to slip from,
Yeah,
healthy skepticism, which says everything that ChatGPT or others, generates, you need to check it because it's not always right. But that's different from, and I accept that, and I'm happy to work with it, rather than
exactly.
I'll dismiss it as useless.
Yeah, it was 80-20. Don't focus on the 20% where it got wrong. Mind you, don't be lazy as well about this. Deloitte in Australia, from what I understand, is they gave the Australian government, they charged them 100 and something thousand for a particular report that an intern did on ChatGPT, and they just sent it off. No partner checked it. The government department got it and said, "This is rubbish."
Probably closing with a few questions around, would you like me to do this next?
Yes, yeah, probably even that. Yes. Would you like me to refine this for you? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
if you're listening
laughter,
to
not
this, please don't
cynicism.
copy and paste that
That's
bit.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So don't be lazy about it. But yeah, it's skepticism, not cynicism. I love that, Glenn. I really do. That's good.
Yeah. On the topic of skepticism, so if anybody is listening to this and thinking, I'm still a little bit skeptical, or I haven't, delved into the experimentation or learnt into my curiosity, today, maybe this is a bit leading. I don't know. You'll tell me, Campbell. What's one behavior or one thing they could focus on, this week, next week, to get them to start them building momentum and start to move forward in, their exploration in this way, or leading?
Do you know, it really is that curiosity. It's opening up ChatGPT and thinking of a report you've got to write, and to ask ChatGPT to give it the context, to tell ChatGPT who you want them to be, who you want ChatGPT to be. Uh, Provide me. I applied for a fellowship thing at a university recently, and I didn't know how to structure it. So I simply went on to, I think it was ChatGPT, and said, I want to apply to a major university for a senior fellowship. Give me the structure. This is the question they've asked me. Give me the structure, the best structure that would be to appeal to the professors of the business school that was, and it was. I spent more time in the prompt than it spent in feeding it back to me, and that was just playing with it. I didn't know what it was going to give me back, and it gave me back a really good structure, and then not quite right. And so then I would refine it. Could you make it less academic and more business tone? And then what I took is it was just a really good basic structure with some really interesting things that I wouldn't have thought of, but then I rewrote it to sound like me because otherwise it would sound like ChatGPT. So that's just one little example of jump in there and treat it like an idiot savant. Don't treat it like an app or a Google search. Treat it like someone who is going to give you back the wisdom and insight depending on how you treat it, how you tell it to behave. And just jump in and think of an issue, think of a challenge, think of a report, and go, right, and ask ChatGPT literally, could you help me with this report? What's the best structure? Who's he? Here's the audience going to read it. This is what the results going to be. Give me 1,000 words and a great structure and 1,000 words on it, and just use it as a guideline, as a starter for 10.
Love that. I love that. I think there's so much in here, Campbell, that you've given us and listeners to think about. It's been absolutely brilliant. I would just urge people to think about the two things that we've talked about in terms you get currently, which is, we're talking about AI, but that's as you so eloquently put it earlier on, Campbell, that's change of a type. It's a very specific change and it's not a rate of change, but it's change. So that's one thing. And on the other side is the leadership side of things, which is, this is all still about being a really effective leader. It happens that the context is changing and it's changing really quickly, but we're still talking about two quite fundamental things of, growing effective organizations. One is managing change and leading change, and the other is being a great leader. So in that way, we can strip out some of the mysticism. And
Like
if
that.
you approach it like that, and then take all of the brilliant advice you've given us on, forward into those contexts, that might lower, again, some of the perceived threat that people have for it. It's trying to keep it in the space that they know, and then being quite specific about the context. It's been a great conversation, and I think if you're up for it, I think we should have you back on a semi-regular basis to go, what's happening now?
Yes, exactly. So what have you used Claude to do today? Yeah.
Are we in scenario 3 yet?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. I won't be able to turn up, but my chatbot version of me, my avatar, will turn up as we'll have 3 avatars having a chat about what AI will be doing. Yeah.
Let's not even go there. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on
Thank
on
you.
the podcast and sharing your expertise and your insight. I hope that leaders listening to this will feel more confident and more likely to go and embrace, just have a play, as you said. I think that's such lovely advice, which is go try it. You pretty much can't get it wrong. So
Jump in, the water's fine. So.
yeah, fabulous. Thank you so much, and we look forward to having you on the program again at some stage.
Thanks, Glenn. Thanks, Najmi.
Cheers, bye.